Thank you to all who have joined us over Zoom. And we've learned over the years that many more people will view this recording later on Tisha B'Av and over the coming days for our virtual Tisha B'Av Isaiah Peace Wall prayer service for Israel and for Jews in danger worldwide. It's many years that we gather, and for many years we gathered across from the United Nations to lift our voices towards the halls of power for Jews in need all around the world. Since COVID, we've discovered that we've been able to reach more people virtually, although many gathered here in person at our synagogue at the Bayit for Mincha services, and will be joining us also via Zoom with recollections of many years in the heat and in the drizzle, standing up and lifting our voices in prayer on this Tisha B'Av, the day in which we feel the weight of the collective history of destruction and pogrom and massacre and attack, persecution against our Jewish brothers and sisters. And after a night of eicha, of wailing and crying out why, after a morning of keynote, of lament and elegy, we find our own voices. We said this morning and last night, Oy mehaya lanu, woe for what has befallen us. But as the day turns in the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, we change the intonation. Oy, woe for what has befallen us, but mehaya lanu, what is there for us? What is in our capacity to inform and educate, to advocate and act for the security and well-being of Jewish brothers and sisters, whether here in New York or across this country, whether in Israel or in Europe, Western or Eastern, wherever Jews are found, that we can lift up our voices for their safety and security, for their welfare and for their flourishing, to speak out against our enemies, to speak out against governments, peoples, and terror organizations, to speak out against anti-Semitism and those who perpetrate its senseless evil. Part of how we do that is by learning from people on the ground who are engaged in protecting and advocating for Jews wherever they may be around the world. So with thanks to Glenn Richter, a partner and leader in organizing this for many, many decades, and with thanks to Rav Avi, our teacher and role model for Ahavat Yisrael and for Am Yisrael, the world around, from whom we'll hear at the end. Thank you to everyone for joining us, for being here because the welfare of Jewish people, those whom we know and all those whom we don't know, is our central concern, the first and foremost thing on our minds, the protection and well-being of our family and our greater family. So this Tisha B'Av, as we hope and pray for Am Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael, for Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael, wherever they may be, we're grateful for the presence of Jewish teachers and leaders who advocate and work for the well-being of the Jewish people. In a moment, we'll hear from Melach Shechet, the tzaddik of Lviv, Ukraine. He's worked tirelessly to assist the Jewish community in the midst of Russian bombardment over these past 3 years. He has dedicated himself to preserving Jewish cemeteries, synagogues, and properties. It's always an honor to welcome him to share reflections of this moment with us. And one at a time after that, I'll introduce our subsequent speakers, Rabbanit Miriam Ackerman Summer of France, Colin Schindler of London, Major Ohad Nagdi of Israel, and Rabbi Dr. Micha Halpern, reflecting on the reality in the United States before turning to Rav Avi to close. So we're honored and grateful to ask Melach to unmute if you're able and to speak with us.
Thank you. Best wishes to all and easy fast. We experience really hard times with the Jewish people in so many corners of the world, and I'm in Ukraine, in the midst of the war. We have so many reasons to say that the war could bring more terrible outcomes concerning anti-Semitism, because we always have to be responsible for everything what's happening, even we're not really, we don't have any guiltiness in things coming out, not because of our taking part in anything. And I was thinking how we could prevent the casualties, what we could do to prevent that wrongdoings may happen and we will be in a difficult times again. I learned from the Parsha Dvarim last week that it says, judge fair to every man between his brother and the stranger. We live among the strangers, and they like us to care about them and to show up our Rahmanis to them. Even we understand that we have our own concerns about things happening within the Jewish people, but they would like us to be part of their lives. It's our destiny. And I understand more than always it was now that we have to spread our Rahmanis to the other people, to the strangers. If we will not be the same, how they could become strangers? This is a question we have to answer. How they could become strangers, to welcome them, to smile to them. Our smiles means nothing if it is not filled with dedication to what they become strangers in our doors. They could only become strangers when we deserve it. It is such a big obligation and responsibility. We care, and we have to remember about that. Even it's sometimes very difficult to take it in, but that's our destiny. And that is the Torah teaches us, that our fairness is our solidarity. And Torah directs us essentially important things, especially now when the relations between Jews and non-Jews became polarized in many places of the world and sometimes unacceptable. But God teaches us to forbid leading to violations and brutality with endless mercy to all. I also learned from my personal experience while fighting for the Jewish heritage protection, we uncovered things which are common to all. We fight corruption on the Jewish heritage, but corruption is general in Ukraine, and it's to all. If we uncover the instruments of corruption, that becomes also tools to the non-Jewish people to accept them as good, as a good way to relieve and save the country in the midst of the war. There is an expression among the Jewish world. The Jewish people is Bnei Rachmones. As our Bnei Rachmones, we always care to the Jewish people first thing, but it comes out that our actions is being Bnei Rachmones to other nations. And they learn from us. We become teachers to them, and they like us to be teachers. They like us to be guides, to guiding them to better world to come. And that's what I wanted to say. Of course, we suffer a lot, but after we gain in our litigation for our Jewish causes, and they learn from them that would be good also to them. I got greetings in the street from Gentiles. They greeted me for being successful in courts to save the Jewish heritage, which was badly destroyed in Holocaust by Nazi and then after by the Soviets. And to explain the destruction, the enemies of the Jewish people who try to use this land for free, the Jewish graves, the Jewish mass graves, they spend time to explain their brutalities on stereotypes against Jews. And we fight them, we put them down with legal objections, with studies, and we gain in courts. We win the court cases, we put them down. And interesting, the Gentiles, they become happy. And if we don't do this, they think that we are on the same side with corrupted interests. Because why we don't fight? Why we don't struggle for that? So we must do this to show that we are doing for us, we do for them. We show to them that our winning, our win the battles will help them. And that's why they thank me openly, which is very important to understand. So in this very day, when we fast by actions, we will bring the day when this day will become a festival on own brutalities happened behind in the Jewish history and bring us lights to our eternity. And we will be able to show that the Hashem's blessings to the Jewish people come true. And I wish to all of us that next year, the Jewish people will turn this day to festival.
Amen. Thank you, Rav Melech. Truly, you have such an expansive soul, and the work that you do touches so many, and your words are words of inspiration. We thank you for coming to us from Ukraine every year and for all that you do. It's an honor to introduce again this year Rabbanit Miriam Ackerman Summer. She was born and raised in southern France and lives in Paris with her husband, Emile, and children. Her rabbinic ordination is from Yeshivat Maharat, and she leads Ayeka, the only modern Orthodox congregation in France, which has been a home for college students and young professionals of a wide variety of backgrounds. I remember very vividly your descriptions last year of protests and the lack of safety that many of your community members felt, and trying to figure out how to navigate those times. And as we read and hear reports from France, we're grateful and eager to hear your insights and updates.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Exlet, for inviting me this year again. I was thinking when you talked about the reports from last year that in many regards it is basically the same but worse. But I also want to preface everything I'm going to say with the notion that as I was reading Eicha last night, my thoughts were it could be much worse. So I think there's also a sense that as you read terrible, awful stories of mothers devouring their children, which obviously resonates. I have two babies. I was thinking, well, things have obviously gotten worse in France, but at the same time, it feels like there is hope. Which obviously, I mean, before you reach the end of Eicha, you don't necessarily get that sense that there is hope. And I kept thinking, if they could find, I mean, if in Yirmiyahu's prophecy, like they could find hope even in the worst of times, we need to do the same. I assume that France is very similar to other countries in a European context, where many Jews feel that they need to hide their Jewish identity, because there is a strong sense of support for the Palestinian people among the general population that doesn't necessarily tend to translate itself into let's find ways to make peace in a way that would be sustainable for Israel and Palestinians, but rather has turned into in my perception, something very violently anti-Semitic, but also anti-Zionist. We keep hearing more and more in political discourse. While I think officially the discourse used to be we need a two-state solution, even among leftist college students and the like, and politicians. Now, honestly, all I keep hearing is the problem was the foundation of Israel. So it feels like even moderate Jewish voices calling for peace are finding a hard time being heard in the public forum, because it seems now, due to the polarization of discourse, of political discourse, everything has turned to a sort of it's either or, and everything is like mutually exclusive and extremely extreme. So I find it hard to express a voice of concern for the safe return of the hostages, for the safety of innocent civilians in Gaza. Like, that seems almost inaudible at times. I think that more of my congregants are wondering whether they should leave or stay than last year. Because the climate has just gotten worse, in the sense that as the war was prolonging itself, many of our Jewish congregants would be asked by non-Jewish people, not necessarily friends, but why don't you do anything about it? Why don't you speak up against Israel? And honestly, most French Jews are fervently Zionist, and it didn't make any sense to ask us to choose between compassion for civilians and our love for Israel. I think that has raised concerns for some people who come to our community asking, shall we move? Do we move to Israel? Where the situation seems crazy as well for different reasons. Should we make Aliyah? Should we move someplace else? Is there a is there a safe place for Jews right now? I mean, sometimes I tell myself, well, maybe the US would make sense, but also I deeply love my country, so I don't want to leave. But if it comes to that, to a situation where French Jews are randomly assaulted on the streets, a rabbi, a famous French rabbi whose name is Elie Lemel, who is not a political figure, who just looks like a rabbi, was violently assaulted twice on the street by people calling him a Zionist and therefore a Nazi, because that equation is more and more prevalent in the political discourse. I was like, okay, well, if that happened to my children, I would seriously consider leaving. And my whole career, my whole life, my family, everything is in France. But it's just like, I think this sense of like concern for our safety, the fact that we've repeatedly been told, even by like the Israeli Department of Foreign Relations, like stop using Hebrew. And I'm like, I don't want my oldest child is 4, and she's just learning Hebrew, and so she's in Jewish school. So when she leaves school, she speaks in Hebrew. Sometimes we'll say things about like Shema Israel and stuff like that. And I mean, Baruch Hashem, nothing happened to us personally, but like at some point, um, a Muslim family was like, "Oh, the babies are cute," and then she is randomly, my daughter starts saying Shema Israel, and they were like, "Ah, Yahud, Yahud," and I was like, "Okay, nothing bad happened this time." Or the next time I go to, so on our way back home, there is Place de la République, which is kind of like the main square where all the protests are filmed with the big like statue of La République, which is an allegory. And there was, I mean, every week, sometimes for days on end, there is some sort of like, I mean, I would call it a siege, but I'm sure there's a better way to term this, but like protests that would like go on for days. And there was one that was like, at some point they were screaming like, um, so fuck Israel, sorry by my language, and but like several times like screaming, and my 4-year-old was like, "What is going on? It's Israel?" And they said, "It's a party for Israel." So I was like, this is terrible parenting, but she's 4 years old, and that's the best I can do right now. Again, I don't even want to go into the politics of it. And that's just like scenes from my daily life. That's of course it's not so bad as like rabbis being assaulted on the street or like my congregants being verbally abused. Hope and I'm glad it hasn't gotten to a point where it's like physically abused. But people do, I mean, I have a few people who I call them, do you want to come join for Minyan? Do you want to come for Kiddush? And they're like, I don't want to be seen around a synagogue. I mean, obviously they weren't extremely religious to begin with, but this has like it has taken them a step further from Jewish spaces where they feel like, oh, if someone was to attack the Jews, they would find me there, and they're anxious about it. So as a rabbi, I'm like concerned about this. At the same time, I'm seeing people who are coming, making, um, having a sort of like teshuva process where they are coming back to shul and they're like, okay, if Jews are suffering so much, I want to be a part of it. So I have to say it's not just black or white. It's not, oh, we're suffering and it's so bad. It's like people are also resisting. And I've seen the resilience of French Jews as well. But I don't know what the future has in store for us. Um, and we're always wondering like, will it still be safe enough to stay in 6 months? Will it be safe enough to stay for the next presidential election? If the far left gets elected, if the far right is elected, like, will it be safe for Jews on the streets? That's actually a question. So I'm sorry, that wasn't very optimistic. You can ask me any questions about the situation, but that's what I had in mind. And it feels Tisha B'Av like. If you had asked me the same question about my experience on Purim, I might have brought something different.
Thank you, Rabbi Miriam. It's honest and it's nuanced. I appreciate the voice that you bring, that moderate voices don't even have a home, weighs incredibly heavily. And the sitting in the relative safety of Riverdale, it's hard to even imagine what you and your community is experiencing. And we are grateful for your leadership and your strength, helping those who are there with you navigate the everyday, navigate their commitments. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Colin Schindler of London was the most outstanding of the student leaders of the nascent Soviet Jewry movement in Britain. Went on to a distinguished career at the University of London, focusing on Israel. He's the author of numerous books and has been a welcome voice in our gatherings in recent years, and grateful to ask him to share some reflections for us regarding the UK.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me back again. I'd like to thank also my old comrade in arms, Glenn Richter from the SSSJ, for his initiative in asking me as well. It's in old age, we do stand together. I think there's both division and unity, certainly in the British Jewish community and probably in the global Jewish community as well. There is division because people have different views about what is happening in Israel. They make often a distinction between the government and the state. And it's interesting, I'm sure this happens in the States as well, that are seated around the Shabbat table on a Friday night. There are very interesting and sometimes acrimonious discussions. However, having said that, which I believe is the reality, there's a unity of purpose amongst Jews in Britain, and I would imagine elsewhere as well, in opposing the anti-Semitism which has sprung out of the floorboards, its periodic appearance. And it's when anti-Zionism tips over into anti-Semitism, where the standard of ignorance is raised, where people say outrageous things. But I do know also that in London, there is a fighting community, that people will not stand for this, that people will stand up against anti-Semitism and against those who will try and marginalize Jews as a national group. Let me give you some examples. The major music festival in Britain is staged at Glastonbury. Takes place over several days. It's been going on for decades. All sorts of groups, rock groups, come to Glastonbury and perform on the stage, including many from the United States. This year, it was different. A group called Bob Villan, which is in fact a duo. Villan, it's a play on Dylan and villain. And the main person in the group, it's someone called Pascal Robinson Foster, from the stage of Glastonbury, referred to a former boss as a Zionist who had, and he spoke about how it was working for Zionists. And he criticized this, his former boss, for signing a letter protesting about a Northern Irish hip hop group called Kneecap, which had glorified Hamas and espouse the cause of Hezbollah. These people know nothing about Hezbollah. They know nothing about Hamas. They know nothing about their ideology. It's part of the zeitgeist of 2025. The very name kneecap takes you back to the troubles in Ireland, because the IRA, when they found people they didn't care for and they didn't want to kill them or blow them up, they would kneecap them. They would shoot bullets into their kneecaps. So even that, outside the Jewish issue, is a food for thought, is it not? So Bob Vylan then led the Glastonbury audience, mainly young people, in a chant of death, death to the IDF. And there was this hypnotic chant, and you felt like a voyeur sitting in the theater and watching a play take place. The caravan of stupidity passed by. So that wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was that the BBC broadcast it all. The BBC, which was, they were broadcasting various stages, various acts at Glastonbury. The people who were in charge were essentially music people. They didn't have a clue about the politics of it. They were ignorant. They didn't have anyone in the studio who could make a decision and say, no, we're stopping this, we're going to switch to another act. They didn't have the ability to even press the button and stop it all. Remarkable. And this is what's happening in England in 2025. The episode proclaimed Glastonbury to be in reality a cesspit of racism, where Jews don't count. It confirmed that the family that organizes this, the Eavis family, have embraced opportunism and populism. And as I said, the zeitgeist of 2025 came first and the music came second. There's been no violence in England, but there has been what I would call shunning and cancellation, an implicit racism, a marginalization where Jews don't count. I was in Australia recently, and I heard from colleagues at Sydney University that when Israelis, or maybe even Jews, I'm not sure of this, appeared in a public arena, many of the students and others turned their backs on the people present, a shunning. Jews don't belong. And a more recent one, which took place a week or two ago, in August, the end of July, August, there's the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland. It's with all sorts of acts, music, culture, everything. And there's the Edinburgh Fringe. And 2 Jewish comedians were essentially cancelled. I give you the quote that one of them wrote. Funny enough, this afternoon, I mentioned this to an old friend, and she said, yes, my daughter knows this Jewish comedian, and they were very, very disturbed, very upset about it. Anyway, this Jewish performer said this: since October the 7th, virtually every Jewish performer I know has witnessed anti-Semitism in the industry, meaning acting, culture, music. And in recent months, the situation has escalated. I've seen threads on social media targeting Jewish performers and warning them that Zionists are not welcome, that they should beware of setting foot in Edinburgh. I've also asked other Jewish performers what made them choose to stick their heads above the parapet there this summer, and they almost all responded that they are driven by Jewish pride. So people are not going to lie down and just take this. And there's an interesting quote, again, I'd like to mention to you from the Scotsman. This is like the leading paper in Scotland. And it said, the silence of other performers about their treatment of their fellow Jewish performers was despicable. And that's another instance of this phenomenon, that people who should say things in support of Jews that have been cancelled, Jews that have been marginalized, are silent. And it's this silence which unfortunately is also part of our history, which is very disturbing. People don't want to be involved. As I said, I was in Australia, and I was in Melbourne, and you know that one of the shuls in Melbourne was attacked, was burned down. And in Melbourne, the police have finally found the person who did this, and he seems to be someone with mental health problems. Now, that's not an excuse, but it's another facet of what is happening, that this repeated media coverage of a complex situation in the Middle East is influencing people with mental health problems. And what you end up with is the attack on a shul in Melbourne. And that's another aspect of this. We know that people with mental health problems often resort to violence for inexplicable reasons. And I think this is another aspect of the situation. Anyway,
I must interrupt you with regard to the mental health question. I really do not accept that as a principle. So I just need to be on the record.
Yeah, you can be on the record, but everyone has opinions, everyone has choices as well. But this is what the Australian police seem to suggest. So the final point is that the British government, Keir Starmer, has funded a 3-year program organized by the Union of Jewish Students to combat anti-Semitism, because it's mainly younger people who don't know the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. They have no knowledge, no understanding of Jewish history. They have no understanding of the raison d'etre for the state of Israel. And there's 5 or 6 people now will be employed to work on a 3-year program in order to combat anti-Semitism. This year, the past year, since the year that has passed since I've last spoken to you, has been a very dark year. It's been a very difficult year, and it's getting worse, as the Rabbinate mentioned. These are not good times for Jews, but it's also, as Tisha B'Av reminds us, a time when Jews should speak truth to power, and the book and the legacy of Yirmiyahu, of Jeremiah, is something which should be important to us. I recently discovered my family tree, that, believe it or not, I'm descended from Rashi, and I'm number 30 on the 30 generations. And what was interesting for me was not a question of yichus, but a question of Jewish history. And you see how the different locations where all these people lived and where they suffered pogroms, it was extremely interesting and extremely relevant to today. that all of us are the inheritors of those who have gone before us, and that it's important for us to still stand up, to care for our fellow Jews, and not to be ground down by those who are ignorant, who don't understand, who wish to marginalize us. Jews do count. Thank you.
Thank you so much for painting a broad picture, so many painful examples and so many trends that we have to take to heart and think about how to respond. Major Ohad Nagdi of Israel grew up in Jerusalem and is a product of the Hesder Yeshiva system. Like others in Miluim in the IDF reserves, he was called back into action after October 7th. He serves as the headquarters company commander of a tank battalion that fought fiercely in Gaza and awaits its next assignment, either back in Gaza or on the Lebanon border. Obviously, the situation in Medinat Yisrael is so complex, it's impossible to get a full picture, but we are grateful to have the opportunity to welcome Major Ohad to share perspectives and experiences with us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for having me this year. I was asked by Glenn, who's my uncle, by the way, to give a short talk today to try and convey what thoughts and feelings go through our mind here in Israel, both as civilians and as soldiers. And to be honest, the truth is that I don't really know. I don't know because for the last 2 years, it feels like so many things have happened at such a high rate of events that it's hard to keep track. On October 7th, our unit was deployed together with hundreds of thousands of other reservists to do what we feared the most, having to literally block with our bodies the invasion of our country and safeguard our citizens. On October 7th at 10 o'clock in the morning, I left my 3 daughters and my 9-month pregnant wife back at home, put to one side all personal needs and fears for that matter, and did what was expected of me. Since that day, with 3 deployments and over above 400 days in reserve duty and another deployment just around the corner, I see things in a slightly different light. I hug my kids a bit longer than I care for. I cherish the time with my wife even more than I did before the war. But above all, I see the Israeli public differently. During my deployments, I met a variety of people, left wing and right, married and single, old and young, but the common denominator was one, and that's unity. We put all our differences aside and work together towards the same goal. May it be helping a family in need, rescuing kidnapped bodies from Gaza, or visiting wounded soldiers. The optics of these achievements, unfortunately, isn't as viral as the pictures of devastation in Gaza, but that is the reality here. I won't say we don't worry about the outcome of these troublesome days, but it is important to get a proper perspective of the goal, of the good and kindness during these dark times. On January 19th of last year, while on a 24-hour leave back home, a couple months after my 4th daughter was born, I got a phone call from my unit calling me back to the command post because one of our tanks was hit with a direct RPG, and soldiers are wounded and killed. I rushed back to the command post and headed directly to the hospital from there to meet 3 families that their children were unconscious and severely wounded, and having to explain to them what really happened in that event. One of those soldiers was in a coma for 3 months, an induced coma for 3 months. His lungs have collapsed. He was recently married. His wife was there. They had no kids at the time. And about a year ago, he underwent a double lung transplant. That was the first time in Israel where a double lung transplant was performed in a patient that had no prior lung problems. And a year later, they now have the firstborn child out of this terrible event. The reason I bring up this story is because, especially today during Tisha B'Av, where we look back 2,000-3,000 years in time and perspective, and we keep on sitting on the same floor in shul, and we turn the lights off, and we say the kinot, and we sing Icha, and we still remember what happened 3,000 years ago, and 2,500 years ago, what happened in Gush Katif. We remember it all, and we don't forget. But we still have to remember that being a Jew is having to keep it for the long run. We have to remember things take a while, and even though times now seem pretty bad, and I guess most of us saw the latest videos of the kidnapped soldiers, we have to remember that we Jews always look in a broader sense. We always see the process that we have to go through. And even though we don't always understand it, we always have to prevail. And hopefully by next year, we get to Jerusalem, not to mourn Beit HaMikdash, to rather celebrate Beit HaMikdash HaShlishi in unity of all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ohad, for your incredibly dedicated service, and in a time that can be so devastating, keeping us focused on the resilience of Am Yisrael, the dedication of our Chayalim, our reservists and their families, who are truly the backbone of Medinat Yisrael and Am Yisrael. Rabbi Dr. Micha Halpern is a political and foreign affairs commentator. He hosts the popular weekly Thinking Out Loud with Micha Halpern weekly program on JBS TV. A dynamic speaker, he specializes in analyzing world events and evaluating their relevance and impact. He's the author of Thugs, How History's Most Notorious Despots Transformed the World Through Terror, Tyranny, and Mass Murder. We're grateful to him for joining us and sharing reflections today.
Thank you very much. And thank you again, Glenn, also for inviting me. I see a lot of familiar faces and names, so hello to all of you also. I'm somewhat intrigued because we're talking about communities at risk, and I'm talking about the United States. 10 years ago, we couldn't have had this conversation with this topic. And so it's sort of interesting. I'm on the record. 21 years ago, I wrote an essay, which I thought was important. It was about the end of anti-Semitism, thinking that we'd gotten to a stage where anti-Semitism was over, certainly in the United States. At the time I was living in Israel. But it was important to recognize that we had gotten to the point of maturity that it was literally socially unacceptable to promote anti-Semitic thoughts in the United States. You couldn't do it in a party, you couldn't do it amongst friends, you couldn't do it in public. What you thought about in your own privacy of your home was different. What you did in your, amongst family was a different story, but you couldn't do it publicly. It just didn't happen. The only time it did happen, I remember very vividly, at a cocktail party at the faculty club at Yale, where a professor, a senior colleague, obviously, of mine 20 years ago or 25 years ago was extremely drunk. And then he let out some very yarmulke, and he nonetheless did not control himself. He continued to speak. That happens periodically. But that was then. It was at the end of that period. It was done. October 7th changed that dramatically. Small leaks in the dike existed before that, but October 7th gave permission to people to embrace murders and murderers of Jews, the murder of Jews and the murders of Jews publicly. And there was a massive shaking, earthquake in the Jewish community as a result of it, because we stood there watching as people pronounced and announced the embracing of murdering Jews. And it shook to the very, very core of who we are as a Jewish community. And the ripple effect is all over. And I need to say that this is not anti-Semitism. This is Jew hatred. And I'm making a huge distinction. The anti-Semites of yore would be embarrassed by this Jew hatred because they had a philosophy, the anti-Semites. They had an idea. This is not an idea. This is a visceral antipathy, a hatred internally of the Jew. And it's something which is dramatic. The original anti-Semites in the creation of the word, they created the word anti-Semite in order to respond to something new. They created it in order to say, it's not that we hate Jews, we just don't want them to be a part of our society. Because if they become a part of our society, whether it be in Germany or in France, and in Germany it was Wilhelm Marr in his essay, and in France it was Edouard Drumont in La France Juive, who said very clearly that Jews will change France. Jews will change Germany. It was like the debate of whether or not women should enter Yale. They didn't say women were bad. They said Yale won't be the same if women are there. And they were convinced that that change would be devastating to the Yale that they knew. And so what happened is that they rejected it, and then obviously they had to accept it. But the point is that that was a hatred which was dramatically different. That was an ideological hatred. That's not what we see here. Jew hatred today is so visceral, it's so internal, it's so dramatic. My Bubba used to call it the mother's milk that people were taught on in the places in which she was born and raised in Belarus. That it was an internal thing. It wasn't an ideological one. The hatred towards the Jew is dramatically different. It's not that we're going to change the society. It's that we're in the society totally. We're totally misunderstood. And the jealousy towards us and the anger towards us is so dramatic. It's remarkable because it's seen once again in the election of the primaries of the mayor for New York. That Zohran Mamdani was not just elected as the Democratic candidate, he's a strong potential future mayor of New York, where a tremendous amount of Jews have voted for him, especially young Jews. And it's especially young Jews. And when you look at the studies on it, the Zenith study is the most pronounced one, where we're talking about 43% of young Jews, 18 to 44, are in favor of Mamdani. That's an unbelievable number. That's a number which should shake every Jew in their boots. How could that be? And I think the answers are the same answers as how AOC was elected. That is, that they're new, they're young, they're dynamic, they're attractive, they're popular, they're different, they're outsiders. And by the same token, that was the same skill set, by the way, that was the same card that was played by Trump's election. He was an outsider and became very popular because of that. So we've got a potential of a person, let's just say something that many was not necessarily covered in the massive press. 2005 and 2008, 12 people were arrested for raising $12 million for, I'm sorry, 5 people were arrested for raising $12 million for Hamas in the United States. They were called the Holy Land Five. In 2017, Mamdani was a rappist. He was a rapper. And he wrote a rap about the Holy Land Five, saying how good they were, how honored they were, how remarkable they were, and how corrupt it was that they were convicted for supporting Hamas. That was in 2017. And when you're 34 years old, when something is 4 years old or 5 years old or 6 years old, that's not a long time. You couldn't say that these things were from decades ago. If they were from decades ago, he would have written them in utero. 4 years ago, in his tweets, he's writing about these things. He's saying these things. He's being interviewed about these things, and they're real. They're now. It's the present. 4 years ago is recent. 5 years ago is recent. Certainly, political history. It's deeply troubling. It hurts to the core, and we're at a loss. Just politically, we're at a loss. The youth are getting most of their information from social media, from the new media, and Mamdani is ever present there. He's all over the place. And the anti-voice against Mamdani is not to be seen hardly at all on the things that they're reading and seeing and talking about in the new media. And so if those young people go out to vote, it's almost a slam dunk that Mamdani will be the next mayor of the largest Jewish city and the largest Jewish city, the second largest Jewish city in the world, largest city, Jewish city in the United States. And it is deeply troubling. And it shouldn't just be for people who live in New York City, for all people, not just Jews, for all people, because the things that he says are not justifiable. If you can't condemn Hamas when being asked 4 times on national TV, something is wrong with your ethical principles. If you can't get around that, it's very simple. 4 times you're asked in multiple places, by the way, not just on Meet the Press. When you're asked that many times and you can't say that what they did was wrong, was akin to saying what the Nazis did was wrong, wasn't wrong also. If you can't get yourself off your principles and move to an ethical level of right versus wrong in the general sense, then we're in trouble. And that's where we're going. And the fact that so many young Jews are thinking this way and supporting him, and so many young people are thinking, puts us in a very, very bad situation in the future. After the primary, I got 30, 40 emails and texts, WhatsApps actually mostly, from Israel saying, are you coming back to Israel? Can we expect you soon? If this is the future of New York, you have to be here. And they were sincere. They were saying it tongue in cheek on the one hand, but they were sincere. If this can be a part of establishment, when you put someone who denies Hamas did the wrong thing on national TV, it's not a spike in Jew hatred. It is Jew hatred as establishment when you're putting it on national TV, when you're giving it that credibility. It's no longer a spike. It's part of everyday life. And that is deeply troubling. So I'll leave it at that. You gave me 7 minutes, Glenn, and I never go over. So that was that. Thank you.
Thank you to Rabbi Dr. Micha. Sobering and unsettling, those are understatements to describe the reality that you're painting for us and the things we need to be aware of. And I recognize and appreciate messages coming in the chat saying, what do we do? And those are things we all want and need to think about. And we will, after the Zoom through the HIR, share ways to get in touch with our speakers or the organizations that they are a part of and supporting for thinking together about how we take action. But it begins with hearing the truth as it's being shared so that we can be informed and empowered then to act. So many of the voices here have been connected by a history of defense and activism for our Jewish brothers and sisters around the world. And for so many of us, that begins with our being the students of Rav Avi Weiss, our teacher and mentor, who's traveled the world to protect and defend fearlessly Am Yisrael wherever they are, and people needy and vulnerable wherever they are. Continues to be a voice of inspiration and action, helping us be our best selves. He's my own Rebbe and mentor, and I'm so grateful to Rav Avi for closing our program with his words. Go ahead and unmute Rav Avi. We don't hear you yet. Oh, I still don't hear you, Rav Avi. See if you can press the unmute on your device.
How about now, Rav
Yes.
Stephen? Toby and I, my wife and I, are living a dream of seeing something we spent a lifetime building, being in better hands, stronger hands, more sensitive hands, and we're just so overwhelmed and feel the bracha of Rav Stephen every moment. So grateful to you, Rav Stephen. And I'm not afraid of the O word, so we feel so much love for Rav Stephen. And Glenn, of course, is very familiar with the O word, so always have to send to Glenn my love, Glenn is my Rebbe. When I wrote this humble work on the Soviet Jewry movement, I dedicated it to my Rebbe, whom I call the Tzaddik of the Soviet Jewry movement. And listening to all of my friends speaking from England, from France, from all over, Ukraine. And listening to Ohad, I'm so humbled. Here I am in Riverdale, sitting in a comfortable chair, and you hear someone like Ohad, 3 children, a wife in her 9th month, just runs to defend Am Yisrael. That's why for me, the holiest Jews on the face of the earth are Tzva Haganah Yisrael. Ohad, my blessings to you and to my grandchildren, to my Gavi, who's now in Gaza. He and all our soldiers should come home safely. With Rav Glenn's guidance, and I see Lenore in the background, who deserves credit, married to Glenn for all these decades. Knowing Glenn, that's not simple, but Toby would say the same about our relationship. See, when you talk about serious issues, as Natan Sharansky has taught us, you have to always know how to laugh a little bit. So, but Glenn and the great late Yaakov Birnbaum started, I believe, Glenn, is it 48 years ago? The Tisha B'Av. Thank you, Glenn. When I used to speak at these press conferences and rallies with Glenn, and it wasn't the phones that they had today years ago, invariably, I don't know if this is part of my 7 minutes, Glenn would get behind the camera, never wanting to embarrass me, but he would go like this. That is the T for timeout. It's time to stop. Do you remember doing that, Glenn? And Glenn would only protest if our back was against the wall. Am I right? And when we would travel, what did you scream about? Avi, did you bring a can opener? Did you bring some salami? Oh, goodness. So we gathered and spoke out about communities under siege in Russia, in Ukraine today, as Miriam spoke, in France, justice, demanding justice in Argentina, anti-Semitism, the way it's spiraling on campus in American cities and worldwide, and yes, speaking out on behalf of bereaved families of Chayalei Tzahal. I don't like the word a soldier who falls. They don't fall, they rise up. Shemasru nafsham. They gave their lives so that Israel can live. But today, on this Tisha B'Av Tafshin Pei Hey, I want to say just a few words about another community under siege, and that is the community of all Jews, the community of world Jewry. We are all under siege because Israel, that we love so, and all of us, we're being painted as moral monsters. We are being painted as the moral monsters of the world. And this is what anti-Semitism is about. We've been painted by the world as moral monsters in the past, immoral infidels, refusing to give up our belief, immoral controllers of the world's economy, sometimes as capitalists, sometimes as communists. And today, we're being accused as moral monsters, starving all of Gaza. It's nothing less than what I believe can be called a national blood libel. A national blood libel. What did Menachem Begin say in Lebanon? He said it in a very Holocaust survivor way, but his words were, Goyim are killing Goyim and they're blaming Jews. Is there anyone who is not stricken by what is unfolding in Gaza? We have grandchildren, we have great-grandchildren, little toddlers. When one looks at those photographs of any human being who is suffering so, it's heartbreaking. And I mourn and I cry concerning the loss of all innocent life, including Palestinian life and lives of people, the innocents who have been killed in Gaza. But in the spirit of Chazal, who say, Ein haposel, Ein, of Chazal, who say that often it is that the posel is the pasul. The one who condemns others themselves are to be condemned. And so I want to read the words from last Thursday's lead editorial in the Wall Street Journal, written by our grandson, Eitan Fischberger. We're so proud of him, and I bless all of you. You should have grandchildren and great-grandchildren who make you equally proud. I'm at the point in my life that not only are our children taking care of me and us, but Toby and I can say, I want to be like my children. I want to be like my great-grandchildren. And here is what Eitan writes. It's must reading for everyone. Just a few words from Eitan. Embedded in the Gaza with the IDF, I stood surrounded by nearly 600 trucks worth of food, water, and diapers, all ready to be delivered. The UN refused to do the job, saying it couldn't operate safely with Israeli protection. Instead, it asked that security be provided by the Gaza Blue Police, a euphemism for Hamas's internal security forces. This is the same group the UN has repeatedly accused of stealing aid, including in October 2023, only weeks after the Hamas-led massacre. In addition to rejecting IDF protection, the UN has declined to cooperate with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, despite its backing by the United States. The result is that food meant for children, Gazan children, is left to rot. Put simply, the UN would rather work with Hamas than the Israelis or the Americans. The UN would rather work with Hamas than the Israelis or the Americans. And then this last paragraph from Eitan, very important. Since October 7th, 2023, Israel has coordinated and facilitated the entry into Gaza of more than 1.86 million tons of humanitarian assistance, more than 78% of which has been food. The population of Gaza is about 2.1 million. The only comparable effort in modern history is the Berlin airlift of 1948-49, during which the Allies delivered 2.3 million tons of supplies to 2.5 million West Berliners over 15 months. Even then, the aid was going to an Allied population. There is no historical precedent for a military providing the level of direct aid to an enemy population than Israel has provided to Gaza, writes John Spencer of the Modern War Institute at West Point. But these facts rarely rake through. And as I often say, the only difference between perception and reality is that it's harder to change perception. Yes, as Eitan writes, these facts rarely break through. Yes, my heart breaks. There is real suffering in Gaza. When we look at the eyes of some of those children, it hurts. But the context is being stripped away. And this is our mandate, and this is our challenge, to fulfill the most basic principle of spiritual activism, to speak out even when it's not popular, but to speak out because it's right. And as the whole world calls us, as it has in the past, that we are world monsters, we, with all of our strength, with all of our differences within the government of Israel and the people of Israel, and Jews throughout the world, we must call out with consensus. I believe that this is consensus. Without nuance, I want to declare this Tisha B'Av. With all the darkness that we've experienced last October 7th, with all the darkness, it's a remarkable time. It's a time when everyone in Israel enlisted in Tzahal, some not in green fatigues, but in the fatigues of doing whatever they could to serve. And so with all of our differences, I believe this is a consensus feeling. Ashrei ha'am sheyesh lo medina k'medinat Yisrael. Blessed be the people of Israel that has as its homeland the state of Israel. And Ashrei ha'am sheyesh lo tzava. Blessed is the nation that has as its army tzava chazak, a strong army. Tzava musari, I believe the most ethical army on the face of the earth. Have there been mistakes? Of course there have been mistakes. War is horrific. It's horrific. But as armies go, Israel, again I declare, is the most moral army on the face of this earth. I'm proud of our children. I'm proud of our grandchildren who are serving. And to them and to the Ehuds of the world, the heroes, I say, Ashrei ha'am sheyesh lo tzava, tzava chazak umusari, kitzva hagana liYisrael, titchazku, temtsu, old Avinu Chai. Rabbi Akiva, one day, his smile will be felt worldwide. Oh, Davinu Chai. Oh, Davinu Chai. Oh, Davinu, oh, Davinu, oh, Davinu. Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael 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 Chai. Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai.
Thank you so much, Rav Avi. Glenn, we invite you with insufficiently expressible gratitude for your leadership and convening us. Invite you to share some closing words.
Okay, here we go. Very short. We began our public Tisha B'Av Mincha and speakers directly opposite the Soviet mission to the UN 48 years ago. But we did not appreciate that even if the USSR's oppression of Jews could end, its poison of anti-Semitism could spread throughout world society, joined by a brand of radical Islamic hate. Our vigilance can never end. My deep, deep personal thanks to Rabbis Stephen Exler and Avi Weiss, Irving Ruderman, Shuli Boxer-Reeser, and all the extraordinary speakers for making this mincha and program possible. And we have a special thought to Barbara Ribikov, who for years had reminded us of Ethiopian Jews' plight. So let's keep pushing forward. Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you to everyone who joined, to our wonderful speakers, to each of you for being here. May we have strength, may we speak out, may we support Am Yisrael wherever they are. We pray not to need to gather again next year, but you know we will be here if we are needed. Am Yisrael Chai, a good rest of the fast to all.